breaking story right now is the civil aviation policy, which we believe has been cleared, the revised version, and we will know the contours, the details in just a bit. Of course, the market will be keenly awaiting for what happens with the 520 rule, as that would pave the way for a lot of low-cost domestic carriers to actually fly internationally, but increase competition for existing established international players like Jet Airways. In a bit, we will have those details, but keep an eye out for all the aviation stocks. Interglobe Aviation is seeing a bit of a spike as we speak. Jet Airways is seeing a bit of a spike. So these stocks are getting active as details pour in of the revised aviation policy that has just been cleared by the cabinet. Otherwise, the market is holding ground at 8,100. And the broader markets are also well in the green. But let's keep it with this story. The cabinet has cleared the aviation policy, and we will find out in a bit what they've done with the 520 rule, because that's been an area of debate within the industry. I see a Spice Jet after spiking, reversing course just that wee bit. But most of these stocks have seen interest over the last couple of months in expectation of what the policy may entail for expanding the sector and making it more lucrative for domestic carriers to fly internationally. Those details are awaited. The only flash that we have as of now is the cabinet has cleared the aviation policy. Of course, if the 520 rule is done away with, it would help new entrants like Vistara and Air Asia, but would increase competition for existing players like Jet Airways and SpiceJet. Sumit Chaturvedi joins in with a quick perspective. Sumit, you have the details of the policy that's been cleared?
Well, aviation policy has been cleared by the cabinet today, and the most important issue, which was 520, that was supposed to make the flying, the overseas flying easier, that the 520 rule has been struck down. Now, the new rule will replace 520. Well, the new rules, what is the new rule? It's going most likely 0 by 20 only, but other details will be coming out very shortly. But yes, as far as the overall aviation sector is concerned, this new policy is going to give a new paradigm shift to the overall aviation sector. It will pave the way for the long-term growth.
Sumit, you're saying? Yes. So, Sumit, that's actually the big story. The 520 rule is to be replaced with a new rule. The market was talking about domestic flying credit mechanism. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. Amber Dubey, who's a partner and head aviation at KPMG, joins in with a quick perspective. Amber, good to have you on the show. What is this new rule? Is it essentially the domestic flying credit that one was expecting?
I think Tanveer will have to wait for further details, but as of this moment, we've been hearing about the 0 by 20, which means the 5-year wait is gone, but you still have to have 20 aircraft in the domestic sector. And this will not be based on the DFC as we were worried earlier, because that would have meant too much of number crunching and would have just created more and more complication, whereas the focus is on ease, increasing the ease of doing business. So I think you just have to have a 20 aircraft fleet and you can start flying abroad from there. Tanveer?
So, Amber, just hold your thoughts in there. This is Supriya Srinath joining in from the Delhi studios. I'm given to understand I also have Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, somebody who's been a part of Indian aviation for a long while, now joining us on the phone line as well. So, Amber, just hold your thoughts there. I'm going to go to Mr. Bhargav for his quick comments. The aviation policy was in the making for a very long time, finally cleared. We are given to understand that the 5 by 20 rule has been replaced with a new rule. Our information right now is that it is either going to be 0 by 20, that either you have 20 aircraft in your fleet, or it is going to be 20% of your entire carriage has to be to regional routes. What do you make of that one norm going? And of course, there's a lot of thrust, a lot of focus on regional aviation, to the extent that there could be a cap of 2,500 rupees on a 1-hour flight, and over and above that, the government could look at some sort of a subsidy. Mr. Bhargav.
See, it can be described as a red-letter day for Indian aviation, because India finally has an aviation policy. So far, there was ad hocism in the ministry. Decisions were being taken keeping in view a certain country in perspective or an airline in perspective. So this aviation policy will bring in a lot of discipline and will give the aviation sector a proper direction. So one must wholeheartedly welcome it. There were opposing views as far as 520 was concerned, but as one has been stating it, what is in the national interest, a decision must be taken, and the decision that has been taken is just the right one that has been done. Regional connectivity, the government has been speaking about. There are a whole lot of airstrips which are unused. The idea is to make enhance air connectivity, which is again a good idea. Now, we are not privy to the nitty-gritty of all those things, but what was earlier in the draft presented, that there will be viability gap funding, there will be a capping on the fare, etc., which is all very good. Now, it's a question of how vigorously one implements it. It is planning is good. Now, one has to look at the implementation part, and I'm sure all aviation stakeholders will welcome it.
Oh, absolutely. And if you actually see the aviation counters on your screens right now, for the benefit of our viewers here, every aviation counter is up in trade by almost 2.3 to 2.2 and 2.5%. But I'm given to understand Mr. Prasad, a former aviation secretary, is also with us right here on ET Now. Thank you very much for being with us. Do you believe, like Mr. Bhargav is giving us to understand, this is a red letter day in Indian aviation, but I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian here and ask you that the industry was very, very divided as far as that 5/20 rule is concerned. The older operators who stuck to that norm thought that by changing that rule, the government was changing the rules of the game midway. Mr. Prasad, your quick thoughts on that.
Firstly, let me start by saying that the fact that a civil aviation policy has been approved today is a very important landmark in the history of civil aviation in India. For last many years, various attempts had been made to draft a civil aviation policy. For one reason or the other, it could not see the light of the day. So I think the government is to be complimented on now having a civil aviation policy which will provide a definitive roadmap by which the civil aviation has to grow in India. Coming to your question regarding the 5/20 rule, now when it was put into effect, there were certain reasons for it. There were a number of new carriers were coming into play, and one felt that there should be a certain amount of credibility as far as international operations were concerned, and therefore it was felt that you should have a certain level of experience in flying domestic and a certain and a 20 fleet strength to mount a credible operation internationally. Now, situation has changed over the years, and I think this is a good way to relook this program while retaining some of the requirements for international flying. So, I think I welcome a decision. As far as the other points of the civil aviation policy is concerned, one doesn't know all the details as yet, but having seen and commented on the draft civil aviation policy, I still feel one of the key areas of this policy is the emphasis on regional connectivity, the capping on prices of short haul flights of 1 hour duration, as well as development of low cost airports in our smaller towns and cities, to thereby giving an encouragement to the connecting the smaller towns with on the civil aviation map. I think this is the crux of it. I don't really know, but one of the things that I had felt was a lacuna in the draft policy was no clear statement coming about Air India as to what are we going to do with Air India, whether it is to continue like this bleeding money, or whether there should be some thought of disinvestment or privatization or closure or whatever it may be. I do not know whether the final policy makes any statement in that nature or not. I would really welcome some definitive statement on Air India also in this.
Well, we still not given to understand what the policy has said on Air India, and as and when the detail does emerge, I'm going to be sharing it with our viewers right here. But Amber Dubey, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to get down to the specifics of the policy. The 5/20 rule that we've spoken about is gone for all practical purposes. It is perhaps going to be a wider field, and the big beneficiaries of this move will perhaps be carriers like a Vistara or the new operators, Air Asia for that matter. Do you believe at one level it's a distorted level playing field? I mean, carriers like a Jet and an Indigo have abided by that rule, have not flown overseas for 5 years, but that rule is all set to change. Amber?
Who's the anchor?
Amber, could you hear that question for me?
Swati Khandelwal?
Hello. Okay. Jitendra Bhargav, if I may ask you the same question, sir, do you believe the rule of the game is being changed midway?
Well, it had to change sometime or the other. The reality is now that you will have an aviation policy, it will give a certain direction, and there'll be no longer any ad hocism by the Rajiv Gandhi Bhavan, where the Ministry of Civil Aviation is housed, where a minister could take a certain decision.
Fair point indeed. Is Mr. Ambar Dubey back with us? Because I'd like to take the discussion forward with him on more specific points here. All right. Mr. Prasad, if I may talk about the focus on regional airlines, and of course there's a lot of incentive there. The government will perhaps even offer a subsidy to flights that connect currently non-operational airports at a fare of 2,500 rupees per hour of this flight. Do you believe that's a rational move, or are we really putting in money where it doesn't deserve to be put in?
No, I am all in favor of this. You see, earlier what we had a pattern where we were compulsorily forcing airlines to fly a certain percentage of their normal operations to these remote areas. Now people were trying to cut corners in this. Everybody flew to Guwahati and tried to cover the requirements of that whatever the restrictions that they had, and but rather not go to some of the more remote areas, etc. Now in this there is now an economic rationale being built in instead of a mandatory provisions of law. You are now bringing an economic rationale. If the operation is unsustainable, government is even willing to look at viability gap funding. If it is sustainable, then the airlines will vie for it and will start operating to various regions. So I think it's a good move. It will promote connectivity and it brings an economic rationale to something which was arbitrary and mandated by the government. So I think I welcome this move.
Indeed, welcome the move. Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, you agree with Mr. Prasad as far as the funding from the Viability Gap Fund is concerned, finance from about 8,000 charged for every flight that is landing?
You see, you were to look at from the national perspective. A, you are going to be enhancing air connectivity to areas which are hitherto not connected. Airlines will come up, and 2,500 fare for 1 hour of flight is a decent fare. Now, if the airlines can really get the right kind of aircraft in which they must have a proper say and proper consultation on it, and then if you have 80% load factor, all airlines will recover money. Because if you take the current kind of scenario, on the sectors which are shorter than 1 hour of duration, flight duration, you still have fares less than 2,500. And considering the fact that the policy outlines huge concessions at the airports in which will be connected under the regional connectivity, the cost of operation will not be as humongous as people may initially work out.
All right, so the cost will not be as humongous as it is going to be worked out. Let's get back to the other specific, and that other specific is that the government is obviously intending to make India an MRO hub in Asia. The service tax on output services of MRO will be zero. Aircraft maintenance tools will be exempted from custom duty. Mr. Prasad, you saw this coming obviously because this has been in the works and it was also a part of the draft aviation policy. But will these incentives alone be good enough to make India an MRO hub?
You see, it makes a lot of sense to have MRO facilities built in India. I mean, today the airlines are sending their aircraft for servicing either to Singapore or to Dubai or to other places. Now, if you can do it in India with the cheaper labor costs, etc., it will not only you will save a lot of downtime of the aircraft in traveling to and fro for servicing, you can get it done closer at hand and at a cheaper cost. Now, the MRO thing, it had caught up in the 2005-2006. There were a lot of proposals coming up for setting up MROs, but there was no incentive for doing it at that time. Now the new policy creates an incentive for MROs. So I welcome this move, and I think this is going to give a fillip to building up of certain MRO infrastructure in the country, which will be very helpful for our domestic carriers.
All right. It will indeed be helpful for domestic carriers. In fact, we're given to understand that the Aviation Secretary will be meeting the airline CEOs on the policy soon. So I think they will sit down and discuss and debate all of that. But Jitendra Bhargav, you're somebody who was a part of running Air India, and I will come to the fact that Air India is absent in this larger discussion. But India becoming an MRO hub in Asia, do you see that as a possibility despite the incentives that may be offered?
You see, it would have
Are
been
those going to be
better
enough?
if the roadmap for Air India had also been clarified, but the policy itself will give a fillip to Air India. Take, for example, the MRO. Air India is best poised to take advantage of the MRO policy. It has a huge infrastructure. It has large number of trained engineers. It has been servicing airlines, though not in on a scale on which it could have done. But MRO policy will enable Air India to enhance its third-party revenues. So overall, if you look at it, the policy is good. Air India must exploit it. And if the regional connectivity, Air India already has Alliance Air, for example, and has the kind of aircraft that can be deployed on short sectors. It's only a question of now exploiting the opportunities that the aviation policy is offering to the Indian aviation in totality, and Air India also can be a major beneficiary of it.
Obviously, MRO hub and not just Air India but other aviation carriers will be a big beneficiary. Amber Dubey is back with us on air. And Amber, I have 3 direct questions coming your way. Question number 1, the government intends to make India an MRO hub in Asia. There could be a service tax on output services for MRO that will be zero. There could be some incentives coming by the way of aircraft maintenance tools. But are those going to be measures enough for India to become an MRO hub according to you? Amber Dubey.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a major step. We've been struggling for almost a decade now to get the tax anomalies removed, and this is our business. It's our aviation sector which is growing, which is bringing in more aircraft into the country, and it's our Indian rupees which are spent by the Indian passengers. But surprise, surprise, 90% goes abroad to Sri Lanka, Singapore, and in the Gulf, primarily because of self-made problems. So, and one of the biggest reasons was this huge tax anomaly, which made MRO abroad much cheaper, almost 20 to 30% cheaper than doing it in India. And this made us lose our GDP, our jobs, and the growth opportunities associated with that. So thankfully, those taxation issues have now been resolved. And now I think the Indian carriers, the Indian government, the aircraft manufacturers, and the MRO companies will now have to work together and create a great MRO industry in India. We can't have it all over the place, but maybe we'll expect something like at least 2 to 3 world-class MROs being set up in India. And I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah. Supriya?
You're excited about that, but how does this really change life for Indian aviation? How does this change life for carriers? And Mr. Bhargav and Mr. Prasad have both pointed out that just apart from the air carriers, the private entities, Air India seems to be a big beneficiary of this move. Would you share your thoughts with us on that?
No, I frankly missed that conversation, but see, MRO, any aircraft that you have, I mean, there is at least 8 to 15% cost on MRO depending on the service contracts. And now, if that can be done in India, I'm looking at a wider benefit. You don't have to fly your aircraft abroad, take a full crew there, park there for 3-4 days, pay the hotel charges and all the local charges, and then fly back the aircraft after the repairs are done. If that is done in India, naturally you are collecting money in rupees and paying in rupees. You're creating local jobs, so the impact is not just for the airline but for the entire ecosystem. And then not to forget that this could be a harbinger of growth for the aerospace sector in India, which is not too high. We can start doing component manufacturing here, and the airports will get more business. So all in all, it's not just the airlines, airports, MRO, aerospace industry, and of course the overall economy which gets benefited from the multiplier effect. So I think the gains are fairly large than just being dismissed as saying, how does it change Indian aviation? I mean, I'm finding it difficult to even understand the question better. Supriya?
Just hold your thoughts there, Amber Dubey, because I do have Sumit Chaturvedi tracking that story for us, and he's joining us with an update there. Sumit, fill us in.
Super. In the latest development, Aviation Secretary has called a meeting of all airline CEOs, which can be held during this week. Well, this is important from the point of view of many airlines not agreeing to many rules in this aviation policy, and they were threatening earlier to go to court over this. So, in order to build a consensus, Aviation Secretary will meet all airline CEOs and he has called CEOs of Indigo, Jet Airways, SpiceJet, and all of them. So the idea is to build a consensus on, especially on the 520 rule, where the domestic carriers are still opposing it. They are saying it shouldn't be struck down. The flying for new airlines should not be made easier. So in order to build a consensus, all airline CEOs will be met. It remains to be seen whether airlines will go ahead and challenge this policy legally in courts or not. But yes, the idea is to make a consensus on the whole issue. Also, 2,500 rupees per hour cap was not favored by airlines. That is another issue which is going to be opposed by airlines, and that's why Aviation Secretary has called the meeting of airline CEOs. It has to be remembered that it is ultimately the airlines who are going to finally execute the whole policy and not the ministry. So that's why calling them is an important development which is happening, and very soon we will be out with more details on all these issues.
So but just hang in there, because we are given to understand that there could be a cap of 1,200 rupees for a 30-minute flight, which roughly works out to 2,500 for a 1-hour flight. So confirm or deny that for us. And we're also given to understand, actually I want to ask you this question, has a call been taken on the FDI limit being hiked in the sector over a period of time? Because the call initially was that by 2020, the 49% could go up to 74. Has a call been taken on that front at all?
Absolutely, Supriya. It has been struck down that Aviation Ministry doesn't want now that FDI cap should be increased from 49% to 74%. So this has been struck down. This was proposal in the draft policy earlier. It has been struck down on the basis of suggestions coming from different corners that Aviation Ministry should not put a policy on FDI. They should take the call as and when the deadline approaches, or they should cross the bridge whenever it comes. They should not take a decision prior, and that's why there will be no decision on FDI or increasing. As far as FDI increasing of 49% to 50% is concerned, that has been taken, but it doesn't mean much for the airlines because airlines are not going to behave in a different way if it is increased from 49% to 50%. But yes, they would have behaved in a different way had it been increased from 49% to 74%. So we understand that the 74% FDI norm has been diluted from this policy, and it's not going to now go from 49% to 74% by 2020.
Thank you very much, Sumit Chaturvedi, for joining us with more details, and we'll of course keep coming back to you for more of that. But Mr. Prasad, the two things that Sumit pointed out there, and two very important developments. The policy has scrapped the 49% going up to 74% by 2020. That is going to be an FDI call and can be taken as and when. How does this life change from 49 becoming 50%? Mr. Prasad, I'll first take that question with you and then go across to Amber Dubey and also Dheeraj Mathur, who's joined us on the phone line.
No, I don't think it makes any difference raising it from 49 to 50%. I understand the rationale of not taking a decision about raising it to 74% as a part of the civil aviation policy. I think this should ideally and rightly follow the overall FDI policy of the country, and the call should be taken on it, keeping in view the overall macroeconomic situation as and when the time comes for that. So I think I support that decision, that this increase really is not supposed to be a part of the civil aviation policy. 49% to 50%, as I said, is quite meaningless. It is not going to impact on the airlines in any significant way. So I think that is something which is neither here nor there.
Amber, you want to come in on that? 49 to 50% is actually meaningless. It's not even going to change lives for Indian carriers. But are you disappointed that the policy does not categorically say that 49 will go up to 74% over a 4-year period?
Yes, Supriya, to be honest, yes, slightly disappointed because we feel aviation, just like any other sector, needs foreign capital, foreign best practices. And there's this bogey of national security which is raised, which is nothing but, as the word suggests, bogey, because there are far more critical sectors like banking and telecom, which are and energy, which can actually cause a real threat to national security. And there we have almost 74 to 100% FDI. We feel it's an artificial barrier. There are other parts of aviation. If you look at airports, cargo, MRO, general aviation, most of those have been opened up to 74 to 100% FDI. So why, as we keep arguing, why should airlines, which is just one tiny segment of the entire aviation spectrum, should they be treated as a holy cow? My last point is about the current rules. The current rules themselves allow foreign carriers to come in with just about 10, 24 or 49% and still have a very significant control over the policies and the decisions of the airlines. So frankly, what do you achieve by artificially blocking it at 49%? We support 74%, and we'll wait now, because some of these FDI decisions, whether in other sectors like defense or telecom and banking, they have happened outside the policy. So maybe 6 months, 1 year or 2 years down the line, the government may realize that frankly this is just a number and makes no direct impact. So they might release it. But at this moment, yes, I'm a little disappointed, Supriya.
You're right. I mean, I think there will be many more aviation players who will be disappointed, who were hinging hopes that they could perhaps bring in more foreign capital, and if that number were to go up from 49 to 74%, and putting in the policy will perhaps have given it more credence. Dheeraj Mathur has been patiently waiting by on the phone line. He's joining us from PwC. Thank you very much, Dheeraj, for being with us. Your first take on the policy and the kind of things that it covers. 5/20 rule is going to go. There is a lot of regional focus. There is an intention of making India an MRO hub, so plenty of incentives offered there. But as far as the FDI is concerned, the government would want to keep its cards very close to its chest right now. 49 is not going to go up to 74%, at least from the policy point of view. As and when the need and the call arises, it may happen. So your quick take on many of the issues that we've just raised.
Well, the first one, 49 to 50, is meaningless. Doesn't make any difference. It should actually go up to 100. There is no justification for not having 100 when you have 100 in so many other sectors. And secondly, and this is related, that there is a lot of focus on regional connectivity. Now, to give a boost to regional connectivity, there will be need for deep pockets and capital. And so the government is going the route of cross-subsidization by the existing passengers on the trunk routes. Now, certainly regional connectivity needs some sort of government support. Now, whether it comes from general taxpayers' money or it comes from other passengers, that's a different point. But it does need support. And therefore, when there is so much requirement for capital, not to allow FDI up to 100% doesn't make sense. But the focus on regional connectivity is welcome. That, we are a very badly underserved market. There is a huge latent demand. What is necessary is that some of the infrastructure issues, aviation fuel taxation, need to be resolved by the government. Only the government can do these two, and then allow the market to unfold, allow market forces to play, and therefore having more capital, whether it's raised domestically or foreign, is essential.
Just to be the odd person out here, Mr. Prasad, if I may come to you, and this is a point being well pointed out here, putting a cap of 1,200 rupees for a 30-minute flight or a 2,500 rupees on a 1-hour flight is actually going to cannibalize the business that railway does, because regional connectivity should be best left to Indian Railways, which is a bigger job creator than actually aviation companies or aviation sector can ever be.
No, you can't in the present day say that you will be entirely dependent on the railways for your connectivity. I mean, the need for faster movement of people, the tourist inflows, the need for people to travel or leisure or business. I think airlines have to play a very important role in this. And as we were talking earlier on this, the rates of 2,500 rupees for an hour's flight, I think is very reasonable, and I think with the judicious planning of the kind of aircraft that the airlines will procure for this purpose, and the fact that you will have low-cost airports without exorbitant airport charges, will make the whole operation very sustainable. And this is going to give a tremendous fillip to the economic growth of these regions. I don't think you can take a view that this is best left to the railways. I mean, railways are a very important part of the whole communication scenario, and a large amount of traffic will always be taken by the railways. But civil aviation has a role, it has a market. There are people who want to travel fast, they want to travel quickly with their business and other things, and therefore connectivity by airlines, by air, will be very important. And it gives the moment you have an air connectivity, you give such a fillip to the whole economy of the region and the place. So that is something which one cannot ignore also.
Fair point indeed, but on that note, I think we'll have to slip into a short break. We'd like to thank each one of you for being with us. We are going to go across and listen to the ministers as and when they brief, and I think that briefing is on in 10 odd minutes. But the big takeaways of the policy is there's plenty of focus on the regional aviation. There is going to be a cap of 1,200 rupees for a fare and a flight of just 30 odd minutes, 2,500 for a flight of 1 hour. We're also given to understand that the cabinet has done away with the 49 to 74% hike in FDI up until 2020. As and when the decision arises, the decision will be taken. 5/20 rule, and that was the most contentious norm, which really widely divided the industry, has been done away with and will perhaps be replaced by 0/20, which essentially means you've got to have 20 aircraft in your fleet to fly overseas. Remember, this is a big beneficiary for the new guys like Air Vistara and AirAsia, something that Jet and Interglobe, that the company that owns Indigo, had opposed tooth and nail. But we're given to understand that Mr. Chaubey, the Aviation Secretary, will be meeting all airline operators to brief them on these measures and to help arrive at an elusive consensus. Slip into a quick breather, come back with markets, and we'll touch back with aviation as and when the cabinet does do its briefing.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.